Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. 10 years ago, on the 21st of March 2012 to be precise, a group of academics, scientists and engineers got together to discuss how software engineering in research can be put on a sounder footing. It was during a collaborations workshop on that date that the term, and following it the role of research software engineer, was created. In time for the 10th RSE birthday, I had the privilege to meet with 7 of the participants of this workshop, and in our discussion we don't only go down memory lane, but also touch on the challenges that lie ahead. And here now my conversation with Rob and Rob, Ilian, Simon, Neil, James and Dirk. Happy birthday RSE. Hello everybody and welcome to the show, and first of all happy birthday everybody, because this is the 10th anniversary of research software engineering as we know it, because you guys coined the term. But before we go into this, can we start with a quick round of introduction? I'm going through the screen now, so not alphabetically. Let's start with Rob.
Afternoon, Rob Baxter. I'm Director of Data Services at the EPCC at the University of Edinburgh.
The other Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Haines. I'm Head of Research IT at the University of Manchester.
Ilian.
I lead the computational chemistry group at the Science and Technology Facilities Council.
Simon.
I'm the Deputy Director of the Software Sustainability Institute.
Dirk.
I'm the odd one out, I guess. I'm Product Manager for autonomous vehicle software company Oxbotica.
Neil.
Hi, I'm Neil Chue. I'm Director of the Software Sustainability Institute and based at the University of Edinburgh.
And finally, James.
I'm James Hetherington. I'm the Director of the Advanced Research Computing Centre at University College London.
We're celebrating the 10th anniversary because on the 21st of March 2012, you guys got together and I read through the email chain, and we had an email exchange before this meeting on who chaired this meeting. So do we actually know who chaired this meeting? There seemed to have been some debate. Let's go down memory lane.
So I think my recollection is that both Ilian and I had responded to a call for what topics should we discuss at the Software Sustainability Institute Collaborations Workshop, and had put submissions in saying we should talk about some kind of recognition or definition of a career-y thing for people who do computer programming in science. Simon and Neil went, those are the same proposal, let's have a session on that. That's what happened. That's my recollection anyway. And it has been a long time.
Yeah, I was kind of looking back through my notes from the workshop, and I realised that we had gone through quite a few different similar sessions. I think there were 3 or 4 that were all broadly around this theme of recognition for professionals working in it. I was chairing one of them, James was chairing another, I think maybe Rob might have been chairing one of the others, but clearly only one of them came up with the name Research Software Engineer, so that was the best one.
And that was the one on the 21st of March then. And
They all were on the same day. We chaired different session, and I guess at the end we exchanged notes, and then we gathered a few of us that were very keen to coin a term or fight for the recognition.
Interestingly, I have no memory of being there at all. I don't think I was. I have a memory of writing the paper, the joint paper that sparked one of the threads here, but I don't think I actually made the meeting, unless my memory is far worse than I think it is.
I recollect meeting with you and discussing it with James. That's how you got into the paper, because we were discussing blogs and how we can be recognized, how we can allow for our species to exist and get some funding to develop our careers. And you were there. I recollect that.
I have a visual memory of being perhaps sitting on the floor or otherwise low to the ground. I think the chairs were not tall if there were chairs, or we might have been on the floor, in a relatively pleasant and sumptuous room but in a modernish Oxford college. That's my visual memory.
Narrows it down, doesn't it?
Yeah, my memory is that I went to multiple of these breakout sessions that, of course, Collaborations Workshop is famous for and really good for. And literally all we talked about from the get-go was careers, and as soon as we'd sort of said research software engineering, that's all we talked about for the rest of the 2 days.
Let's not forget in this conversation to talk at some point about the Collaborations Workshop and how that structure and the unconference process around the Collaborations Workshop has been really creative in lots of things in this.
Well, the Collaborations Workshop is a thing we've been running not just as the SSI, but as the precursor to that, as OMI UK, and that started, I think, in 2009. So it'd been going for a couple of years, and then it fell to me to run it in 2012, and we had this incredibly good luck that Queen's College in Oxford had just set up this new, like, purpose-made, beautiful conference venue, the kind of thing that we would never be able to afford usually, but because it was their first year, they gave it to us cheap. So we had this amazing venue, which lots of breakouts and it's a sort of beautiful old college. And at the same time, I think the other thing that strikes me is it just happened to be, it was March and the weather was amazing. It was really bright and sunny and people were meeting outside, and it just felt like this idyllic time. And exactly the kind of place where important things happened, and such as the name being coined.
Well, what I'm interested in is how did it actually lead up to that point?
So the Collaborations Workshop has always been about trying to create an organized sense of chaos to get ideas flowing. And the previous ones that we'd run have always been around the topic of research software rather than research software engineering. So it was about getting researchers together with developers and then seeing what happened when you gave them room to really just kind of like talk to each other and find out what the different problems and challenges and delights were around working in this space. And so the previous workshops had been more around the different scientific applications. We'd really become aware of the fact that there were a lot of people working in the space, including a lot of the people who are in this podcast room just now, who were looking for a little bit more. One of the themes that started coming up in the lead up to the organization of this particular event in 2012 was around how we might promote and provoke discussion about where this new group of people went. And as Simon said, he was the one who was in charge this year of trying to bring it all together and provide a little bit of structure and guidance to the community about where we would be going. Simon, do you remember kind of the other themes that were going on at that point? It's really interesting. I think there was something else around credit and how people got credit for software. It all feels like at that point in time, 10 years ago, it was just every different role in the sort of software community going, we're not recognized. We want to be valued more.
Software wasn't quite a tangible output and something to apply for funding up to 2010, 2012. It wasn't. And of course, there was a proliferation, not just in the area of HPC software engineering, which was at its height then. It was also digital research, all the scholars who are into biology and geo and so on. So I guess all these sciences developed people a need for software outcomes. Those people that dedicated their time to creating those digital assets felt the need to self-recognize because academia wasn't quite providing for their part.
So Neil was saying it's a kind of organised chaos, the Collaborations Workshop, and I disagree with him there. I think it's not unorganised chaos. It is just pure chaos. So what happens is, rather than sitting everybody down and just lecturing them and doing PowerPoints at them, we decided to flip that traditional workshop, and people come in and suggest topics. And this is where we have this sort of conflict between lots of different people talking about the software career at the same time. But what I think is really interesting is to look at the topics that were suggested back at that time. And it's all stuff, like Neil said, about software credit. And that's still a major issue that's going on right now. They're talking about how to fund and support software and research, and that's still a major issue that's going on right now. And in fact, when you look through the list of topics that people suggested, there's a lot of similarity to what you'd see if you were to run the Collaboration Workshop now. The big one that's changed is the fact that people aren't fighting for recognition for research software engineers, because we've made so much success on that particular campaign.
Like so many movements, I think it grew out of the zeitgeist. The end of the noughties there was coming to the end of the UK Science Core programme. And that was the first thing that really jammed together software people, researchers, all in one big melting pot and say, right, do some big stuff. And so the understanding of the use of software in research really grew out of that. OMI UK itself was the Open Middleware Infrastructure Institute. We look back now at that name, we think, what even did that mean? that birthed the Software Sustainability Institute, and that the whole recognition of the RSE as a role was, for me, the culmination of that zeitgeist. You can't start a revolution by yourself the people have to be ready for it, and the environment has to be right.
James?
I always tell the story like this. I and many others spent some time doing postdocing, creating infrastructures and frameworks and middleware tools, which we thought were exciting and were going to transform research, but which got published in computer science conferences, but were never actually used by any scientists to do science. What I think we've got right more recently is combining service and scholarship. One of the things that I'm proud of about the RSE movement is where I sometimes say we're deliberately middle author scientists, working with researchers as part of that team-based research and being driven by pain points within particular research communities, I think has been a more fruitful way of delivering digital transformation in research than perpetrating middleware. And I say that as someone who's done my fair share of perpetrating middleware over the course of my career. One of the things I'm pleased with about what we're doing in neck of the woods in UCL is that UCL ARC is both a research institute and a platforms and services centre, professional services centre, and I think doing both of them together is one of the things that the RSD movement's done right.
Dirk?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to this. At the time, I was just finishing off my postdoc, and I was faced with the real issues like, I don't really want to become an academic. I've written a lot of software, but my contract's ending, and where do I go? And the organized or unorganized chaos of the collaboration workshop was really interesting to go. I was like, okay, let me go see what other people do. I remember Ilias and the post-its and career, and I was like, yes, this is, I found something I could latch onto. It's like, okay, we need to figure this out. It was a very personal thing for me at the time.
I think that what I've heard is that, first of all, people actually already worked there. They weren't called research of engineers. It was more like what Dirk said and what everybody did, including myself. We did research, we wrote a lot of software, and that was basically our main job. That meeting actually triggered a process where it led up to the recognition of a role. And I was wondering, that process actually didn't come about automatically. You probably had a few arms to twist. So could you talk a little bit about that?
It's interesting that we're talking about a microcosm within the wider question of team-based science. Division of labor is a good idea in some circumstances. The idea that we can put research teams together with software specialists and data specialists together with the academics leading the research questions has turned out to be fruitful, not just in data and compute intensive research in our areas, but in a lot of other areas as well. And that's a change that science has really seen over the last 20 years, of larger teams coming together with a variety of different skills to deliver research. One of the challenges we've faced in building RSE, and this is where all the credit questions and the career progression questions come from, is that historically, academic career progression has looked to the lone hero. So I think what we're talking about within RSE is just a piece of that wider cultural change throughout science and scholarship.
Where team science and RSE really come together is what we've just been discussing, which RSEs have been around for as long as computers have been around in research. It was just the difference that happened was that we named the role and then we led a campaign to get that role recognised. What's happening with team science at the moment is it's recognising the people who already exist doing an amazing job in research who aren't traditional researchers, rather than creating these new teams. They've always been around.
I think reflecting back, one of the things that really helped the success of what was to come in the RSE movement was that there was a very public debate about what that role was. Because I think one of the challenges we'd had in the past when people had considered similar things is that no one could pin down a very precise definition of what it meant to be a research software engineer. And there were a number of articles that came out in the sort of year or two after this workshop where people explored what it might mean to be a research software engineer. And in doing that, what struck me was that it led to lots of different people from different areas all going like, oh yes, that really does look like me. It's almost like we were creating some sort of band where you've got the different members who all kind of like represent a particular stereotype or archetype, and people were connecting with the different types, whether that was the craftsperson, whether that was the scholar, whether that was the engineer. It helped things get going, because otherwise we could have just been talking in our little groups together without realizing that we had more commonalities than differences.
Yes, I think that's a really good point, Neil. And I think certainly from the perspective of my experience straight after the collaborations workshop in Manchester was that it was really useful to have the name, because then you could have discussions with people in a different way. with peers about what we were doing. Well, we were research software engineers, rather than this person says they're a postdoc in such and such, this person says they're an RA in another domain. So I think having the single name really helped, but it also helped to talk to other people at the institution. We've got this thing now, it's called research software engineering, and it encapsulates all these people who are throwing themselves into writing software rather than papers. Just having the name and everyone using the same name really helped, because people just heard it so much. I keep hearing about research software engineers. Maybe this is a thing.
There were a few dogmas. I mean, many of our institutions have worked as long as computers have existed on software, and those that were sort of, we call them now digital scholars, were sort of badge librarians, and the rest of us that worked in the materials area, where materials could be everything, sort of all the natural sciences, in fact, were just postdocs. Or we had permanent jobs, but we were postdocs. And even now, there's still a problem which family you belong as a research software engineer, at least in academia, whether you're technical staff or academic staff, which lets you put proposals in and take credit in different ways. So the problem still persists. We're just united as a front, and the name somehow took off because it encompassed all the different aspects of research software engineering. And we are celebrating really the self-recognition and penetration within academia. But here in the UK, academia is a multi-headed monster, because each institute or each university has to allow for that role. For example, in the Netherlands, if the Prime Minister says that role exists, all universities accept it and they have it on the register as a role. So it's been more difficult here in the UK, but of course it first started here in the UK. And that's why it's been so successful and then proliferated outside internationally.
I think it's important to reflect on why we care. It's rather selfish if our motivation here is we want to have good careers for ourselves. I don't think has been the motivation for the RSE movement. I think the recognizing that reliable, trustworthy, efficient, productive science with data and computers requires good software, and that will not happen without a way to recruit and retain software engineers into the research effort is the bit that matters. We do this because we care about science and we think that good science needs good scientific software. A decade later, I was disappointed that we haven't done more to get the software for epidemiology onto a good and solid footing that we've found over the last 2 years of the COVID story. There has still been a number of important pieces of research working off large unstructured Fortran files. It's sad to me. We've done a lot, but there's a lot still to do in terms of the inventory of scientific software that needs to move forward in terms of auditable, trustworthy, verifiable data and computationally intensive research.
Yeah, well, that's a nice segue into the next question that I have. But before we do that, let's hear from Dirk. You raised your hand, and then Simon.
Yeah, I mean, I just echo what James said. A lot of it was around career and progression and that. But I know I also spent a lot of time, or cared a lot about just how we develop and the right tools and anything from simple version control to how you manage and structure software and track issues, etc. And there's a whole educational piece that for me fits under the movement as well. Just get to better software, because that's what you need for any kind of non-trivial piece of research. But that then ties back into what's the reward function to actually promote that? And there wasn't one.
The setting up the role of research software engineer, as James was saying, it sounds self-serving, like we were trying to promote this role because we wanted it to exist, because most of us were in that role. But if you want the software to be produced in a reproducible, sustainable way, then you have to have the people with the skills that are capable of doing that. And making sure that there was this role in existence was seen as was the reason that really we chose the RSE campaign as our first campaign in the SSI. We wanted to make sure there were more skilled experts out there contributing to software, which meant that we'd advance research in a sustainable way.
We've now got 10 years of research software engineering. You already highlighted that you feel that we're not quite where we wanted to be. What do you see are the next challenges then? And what position do you actually want to get to?
If I may, let me ask my colleagues a question, because I haven't been involved in the collaboration workshop for a long time. I might hazard a guess around the question you asked, Peter, that it started out talking to, if you like, the cognoscenti. So the first people who really got it were the engineers, the astronomers. But I think the number of disciplines that the RSE role touches has broadened enormously out into arts and humanities, into life sciences, which I don't wish to denigrate my humanities and life sciences colleagues, but were always perhaps later adopters of modern computational methods than, say, the astronomers or the engineers. But I think we have seen a broadening. The ideas of team science, if you like, are fairly new in some disciplines. I think the UK's response to COVID-19, while there have been cottage industries, absolutely, it's seen a quantum leap in collaborative science. Part of that, maybe the RSE movement can't claim a lot of credit for that, but it's enabled this sort of professionalization of the digital methods that we bring to come about. And I think we've seen the benefits of that.
I do often kind of reflect that it's I think now nearly 80 years since the birth of the digital humanities, so it tends to be less around other disciplines being slow to adopt. And actually, I think one of the things which we haven't quite managed to solve since the Collaborations Workshop, which is around how we fund and how we ensure that we maintain kind of consistent funding to this area. The thing I was going to reflect on, though, was that in parallel, in the last 10 years, something else was happening, which touches back on Dirk's point around the idea of how do we kind of make this better through training and through upskilling as well. And that was the carpentries movement.
Yeah.
So in the UK, 2012 was also the first year in which we paired up with Greg Wilson, who was the founder of the carpentries, to run the first workshops in the UK. I do feel that there's been something that's gone hand in hand with the RSE movement and with the carpentries movement, because the two are linked, and many RSEs gain a lot from delivering training to researchers. And that's had a really big impact. And so, you asked the question, Peter, 10 years on, what's still to come? I think we've almost managed to get things working at the base level, and we managed to get things at the highest level. So last year, it was really interesting to see that both the OECD and UNESCO had added software into their open science and open research policies. So that's coming right at the top down. Science ministers now know and care about software. It's the bit in the middle that's still missing. That is still very much around trying to rebuild and restructure all of the old ways of doing things, organizations, governance, and so on, that haven't really moved on in the last 10 years.
You've got to stop thinking of success as a binary thing, because I think that's what put people off challenging this problem, because it seemed so huge. Now, how can you possibly fight for another role within academia, within research? It's too big a problem to face, so people just generally didn't face it. But what we've done is we just sort of pushed the envelope a bit. There's more likelihood that people will get employed to do the thing they do on a day-to-day basis rather than being named postdoc and being hidden in a back room somewhere. We are definitely in the business of changing academic culture, and to think that you could do that overnight with a very short period of time is insane. When it comes to things that we need to challenge next, I think one of the reasons that the RSE has been so successful has been based on the fact that we had these RSE groups spread out. In fact, James led the first one at UCL across 31 universities across the UK, and that gives us this really important set of groups who can fight and campaign on behalf of research software engineers. We've done great things for RSEs and RSE groups. The next challenge will be doing the same for RSEs embedded within research groups.
Picking up on Neil's comment about the carpentries, I think RSE gave people a name, a label, but the carpentries defined the skill set that went along with that job title, if you like, and perhaps a channel or a vehicle to promulgate that. And I think the two things together were transformational. They really have been transformational. Are we finished yet? No, I don't think we are. Will we be? No, I don't think we will, because science changes all the time. The methods change all the time. The use of digital methods, computers, is not going to decrease. And I think it's going to be a process of continual improvement.
I just want to reflect on some points. I mean, there has been quite a significant change, at least in my opinion, even though the drift between the pure software engineers and the pure researchers becoming bigger and bigger. Younger people are more prepared with respect to best practices of software engineering, the adoption of those as continuous integration and testing, and so on. Maybe they don't want to dedicate their career specifically to research software engineering, but they have the basics. What is missing is the funding, because it's a huge infrastructure. It is not just the software, but the data, how these are connected. And I think the challenge, at least It's actually semantization of everything that we do, everything that we model, simulate, and so on, because we are tired to have own standards for separate communities and so on. What we need is ontologies to govern it all, and people agreeing that this is the way to do it.
It's been interesting working in cultural change in academia while a lot of other people in allied trades have been doing that too, and thinking about the technician's commitment and thinking about the researcher concordat and the work against precarity in early career researchers. There is a lot of cultural change and cultural challenge going on in the sort of around the discontents of academia. And we're a part of that story as well. Now, that's interesting. Academia is reforming itself, perhaps in response to some of the reproducibility crises, perhaps in response to just the politics of power. There's a lot going on in equality, diversity, and inclusion in academia at the moment, which this group of people is not very good at. We are. By which I mean there's 8 men on this call, which is not great.
Indeed.
But we're in a wider setting of cultural change in academia, of which the work towards balancing technical contributions, engineering contributions as part of the scientific team is a piece.
I was going to pick up on Ilian's point and use it to pose a question. A question maybe to Neil and Simon, but perhaps generally as well. Do you think that the RSE movement had an influence in changes at undergraduate curriculum level? Maybe changes at school level is too much to ask, but changes at undergrad curriculum and the introduction of digital skills earlier in the research career path?
I think that's a really good question, Rob, because at the same time, and riffing on James's point about this being part of a much larger shift in the way that we saw the sector going, I was very involved in some of the work that was being led by industry in understanding what we should be teaching at high school and at university undergraduate level. A lot of it led by Ian Livingston, I think it was. It was noticeable there that the drivers were different, but they had the same goals. So the drivers here were about creating properly skilled people for the burgeoning UK digital economy, and particularly the creative economies. However, the outcome is the same. You're trying to teach people to be creative thinkers who can use digital methods. And all of the work that was going on with digital upskilling, I think, fits very closely to trying to improve the way that people are taught so that coming out of their undergraduate degree, they can go into the more scientific computing side of things that we're looking for in research software engineering. However, I think there are still huge challenges. Like James mentioned the issues with equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is the area where I've moved much more into in these last 10 years and around research cultures. It's something that I wish we could have changed earlier on. We're always striving to improve the diversity of participants, but we can't get away from the fact that the original makeup of the research software engineering movement skewed towards a particular demographic. I think it still has a way to go there. There's a lot we can still do with research culture change, particularly around this drive towards better team working. And it is good to see that there are people who are doing things around this. The Royal Society, also the Wellcome Trust, and individual universities as well are really starting to make strides. It's almost as if all of these small different things from each of the different movements have built to an unstoppable wave that will hopefully wash away a lot of the bad parts of university culture.
First of all, I have to say that I think 8 Middle-Aged Blokes is a good name for a new podcast series. So that's
I think there are quite a few of them out there already, but no mind.
One of the interesting things that we're facing with the research software engineering community is that so currently RSEs are put together in this sort of artisanal way. You spend years on your PhD, you slowly pick up some software engineering, and then you get to the end of it and you realize that you actually quite enjoyed the software-y part of your research rather than just the researchy type side. So you follow that path. And one of the things we're going to need to do, especially if we're to continue to have enough RSEs to go around as the term is getting broader and broader, is to ensure that we can train. I think it would be great to have undergraduate courses in research software engineering because that's the right time to start training people. We have some masters and we have some sort of training coming together in CDTs and in different sort of doctoral training programs. But I think we need to think about how we're training our RSEs to make sure that we've got enough to go around.
One of the challenges that we're really wrestling with in UCL as we build our new department here is we're trying to define career structures which recognise the pathway into RSE that Simon's just described, but are not exclusionary to people who have come. In fact, we have very talented research software engineers who don't even have undergraduate degrees, let alone PhDs within our community, and are brilliant parts of that community. Retaining the fact that we are proud to be part of the scientific community, we are scientists, without being sucked too deeply into the status control parts of the academic culture is really challenging. I can't give up on wanting this to be a PhD level occupation, because it is and it should be. So I want that PhD there in the job description criteria, but I want to do so with a phrasing and a way that makes it clear that people who've taken other paths are welcome. That's a challenge we're wrestling with quite hard as we define what it is to be an RSE in UCL at the moment.
Before I go and pass on to the other ones, actually, that's a very nice segue to the last question that I actually had on my list, which is in fact the whole career path question. Research or software engineers in general they're not only working in academia, they're working in the private sector. And how can we actually make sure that we attract the right talent?
So James makes a really good point there. Fortunately, or simply by what EPCC is, we've had tremendous success over the years in bringing people in from all sorts of walks of life. We I think, derive tremendous benefit from that, from not being restrictive. You don't have to have a PhD. You've got to be interested in solving problems, adaptable, and be able to code, if you like. What story do you then tell when you try and hire? I think going back to a point James made earlier, in the team science picture, but the people who can come in and really can apply the skills they have in solving problems which are worth trying to solve. There is a role for people like that, and those skills are increasingly valued. And that's the story we need to keep telling.
Yeah, I want to reflect on a few points. Wherever I have gone and preached about software and modeling, I try to, people felt I was enthused, and I enthused them about it, because it's about personal conviction. And to me, software is not just a discipline. It's sort of an art to write software. Of course, most difficult thing is to adhere to the best practices. And this is where some young people fail, even though they're more prepared than we are. They're prepared enough to start the path, and the path that James was talking about are just a way to get to the job or to get to where you want to, because it doesn't matter where you come from and what you do. If you have the love and the passion for it, you will eventually end up there. And probably people like me went for the shirt rather than for the logo, because I wanted to do the software rather than have the badge working at Cambridge, where I originally started, or Bristol, or UCL for that matter. It's for the love of it.
I think one thing that, looking at the most successful RSE groups, both in academia and in industry, I'm struck by the fact that there is no single way to become a successful RSE in a successful group. In fact, I think the success of those groups has come because they've been very open to having a large range of different people coming from many different diverse backgrounds. Because when we look at modern team science, and particularly the way that so many projects are larger international collaborations, you do need to have a real kind of breadth of experience. And you have both the kinds of facilitator people that Rob was talking about, along with very specialist technical expertise, alongside people who are able to craft that kind of H-shaped person where you're going both broad and deep, but acting as a connector. I think the challenge, though, is understanding what the career paths for RSEs are, is to make people aware that there are these opportunities from different areas. We've looked at, one of the pieces of work that we've been doing at the SSI is to look at the wonderful international RSE survey results and see where do people come from and where do people go. And most RSEs still come from physics. And yet we also see that there are RSEs coming from history, from theology, from social sciences, and moving into mathematics and engineering and so on. So the mobility is there. How do we encourage that? I think part of it is going back to what other people have said. It's the fact that you can work on so many different things as an RSE that is the real attraction of the job. And as a career path, it's never going to be just about the money. It's going to be about what you can continue to learn, who you can continue to work with, the problems that you're solving. Going back to what James said, we're not in this for the research software engineering. We're in this for the research.
Right back at the start of the campaign, a few of the people who were on this call actually wrote a post called "The 10 Top Reasons to be a Research Software Engineer." The ones that kept coming through, and you see this when you look at the International RSE survey as well, are the people, it's the joy of discovery, of working in a research environment, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. And the other one is the sort of freedom to solve the problems you come across in your own way. I completely agree with that as a concept. When I look at my own job, I absolutely adore the fact that I get to work across all these different technologies with these people who care about learning new things and discovering new knowledge. The draw into the RSE role is incredible. What we need to do is make sure that we're not pushing people out the door in the way that we were previously. So we're giving them short-term contracts and not recognising the input they have. So I don't think we have any problem with getting people in. It's just making sure that we support them and look after them in the long term when they are in.
I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, back up what Neil and Simon have actually just said about the broad nature of where people come from, or no, come from physics and go into a broader place with RSE. And I think we've certainly seen that a lot in Manchester, and it's almost as if the RSE role has given people permission to move outside of their domain. So you see a lot of people in academia, they do a PhD in subject A, and then they be a postdoc in subject A, and then they perhaps go on and carry on doing things in subject A. Whereas with RSEs, have we enabled people to move about domains a bit more because the software is the thing that sort of joins everything up. You know, we had someone with a PhD in astronomy who was very used to pulling particular flat files that come off telescopes and doing something with them. Worked wonders with a linguist in humanities because this professor just happened to have a load of flat files that, and it was just the same thing. So I wonder if that's something else that we've enabled.
Ilian, you wanted to say something about gender balance.
Yes, well, that just 2 comments. One of them is if we start with a very skewed distribution at universities, we cannot really correct for it later on. I think what's important is that people identify as RSEs, and it's not important what gender they are and where they come from. It's important to induce the younger people at the age where actually they can decide for themselves what they want to do and whether they develop love for it or skills for it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that it's impossible to correct later on. I think you can make effort to give other people from other communities.
I agree. But that's a lot of corrective efforts that it needs to be put in.
Robin, I think we're coming to the end of the podcast now, so there is 1 or 2 more contributions, and I'm afraid we have to close.
Just weaving together what Rob and Ilian were saying, I mean, diversity, sort of gender balance in physics, for instance. We could debate whether schools need to do more to maintain the enthusiasm of girls for physics at an early age. The idea that RSEs really are a cross-cutting skill set, a set of methods which can be applied to all sorts of digital problems in all sorts of disciplines. And I think we could hope that enabling that cross-disciplinary flow could help address particularly gender balance, where there are traditionally subjects which have a more reflective gender balance, perhaps on the arts and humanities or indeed in linguistics. But a research software engineer can, in principle, cross that boundary really easily.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time today.